A meet cute is a serendipitous first encounter between two people that is awkward, funny, charming, or unlikely, and hints that a romantic story may be beginning. And for many years, for many decades, in fact, the meet cute was a standard storytelling convention for pretty much all romantic comedies. If you were making a rom-com, it simply had to have a meet cute in it because it was the ignition switch that got the whole plot moving along. So for instance, you have A Roman Holiday, where Gregory Peck by chance meets Audrey Hepburn playing a runaway princess, sedated and babbling on a public bench. Or you have Love Story, where Ryan O'Neal wanders into the Radcliffe Library and meets Ellie McGraw, who roundly mocks him as a rich Harvard preppy. And then you have When Harry Met Sally, where Billy Crystal shares a long, irritating drive to New York with Meg Ryan and decides that he can't stand her. Or you have Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet, where Leonardo DiCaprio locks eyes with Claire Danes through a lit aquarium at a costume party. And if you are a millennial, then this was and remains peak romance. And then there's Silver Linings Playbook, where Bradley Cooper meets Jennifer Lawrence at an awkward dinner party, and they bond while comparing psych meds. But while the meet cute has long been a fundamental component of romantic comedies, it is important for us to note this morning that the meet cute itself is much older than Hollywood, much older than film, older than the novel, older even than the printing press. It goes all the way back to the ancient world, and in fact, it's exactly what we have on our hands this morning. Chapter 2 of the book of Ruth is an Old Testament style meet cute. And this is by no means an exaggeration. The parallels between this chapter and the plot of, let's say, Pretty Woman are right there on the surface. And I say that because in Ruth and Boaz, we have two characters so unlikely to cross paths, let alone fall in love, that they are just begging. They're just begging for a rom-com style meet cute to bring them together. Boaz, he is wealthy, he is landed, he is established. He is a man of standing. That's what the text describes him as. He's basically the most eligible bachelor in all of Bethlehem, very much a Richard Gere type figure. And Ruth is a destitute foreign widow, so down on her luck that just in order to be able to eat, she has to pick scraps of grain left behind the workers harvesting the fields. That is the equivalent of someone today having to go through a dumpster looking for scraps of food to eat. So when it comes to being down and out, Julia Roberts has nothing on our Ruth. So on paper, a romance between these two characters, Ruth and Boaz, should, right? It should be a non-starter, which of course is exactly the setup that every great meet cute needs. The bigger the gap, the better the story. And also, like every great meet cute in history, the first encounter between them is unlikely in all the right ways. Ruth isn't out looking for love, she's out looking for lunch. And she chooses to collect grain from a field completely at random. And wouldn't you know it, but the field she randomly chooses happens to belong to Boaz. And the actual Hebrew of the story goes out of its way to emphasize the serendipity of this moment. What it literally says is, it happened that Ruth happened into a field that belonged to Boaz. Complete coincidence, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, says the text. And wouldn't you know it, but at that very moment, who should happen to turn up at the very field in which Ruth is gleaning but McDreamy himself, Boaz. As he arrives, he sees this woman he doesn't recognize in the field, following behind his harvesters. And smooth operator that he is, he suddenly turns to his foreman and says, "Hey, who's that? What's her deal?" The foreman explains that it's the young woman from Moab who would come back to Judah with Naomi. And the Bethlehem rumor mill apparently had been running at full tilt since their return because Boaz knows exactly who she is and without any further explanation knows exactly how dedicated Ruth had been to her mother-in-law. What then follows is essentially the 1000 BC version of the famous Pretty Woman shopping scene. But rather than giving Ruth a credit card and unleashing her on the shops of Beverly Hills, Boaz says, "Stay in my field, drink my water, glean where the grain is good. I'll make sure that no one lays a hand on you." Then at lunch, he piles roasted grain onto her plate until she's full and actually pushing aside leftovers. And then after lunch, Boaz instructs his workers on the sly to leave extra barley behind, especially for Ruth, as they're harvesting. So at the end of the day, Ruth is able to return to her mother-in-law with an entire basket of grain, which was the equivalent of half a month's wages. So in this second chapter of Ruth, we have all the makings of a quintessential meet cute. We have a mismatched pair, we have a serendipitous encounter, and we have a beautiful act of kindness on the part of Boaz that hints at great romance in the author. And in true Hollywood fashion, Ruth and Boaz both return to their homes at the end of the day, not knowing that this chance encounter would ultimately change the trajectory of both their lives. We know it well because we've seen the story play out 100 times before, but they are none the wiser. And that's the thing about a meet cute that I want us to notice this morning. The audience always knows more than the characters do. From our vantage point in our seats, tub of overpriced popcorn in our laps, we can see the director's hand at work arranging the pieces, nudging these two people together, building toward some heartwarming and dramatic conclusion. But the characters themselves, they are completely in the dark. Right? When Romeo and Juliet catch eyes to that aquarium, they don't hear the swelling music that we hear, specifically "I'm Kissing You" by Desiree. They don't get the slow motion shots and the lingering close-ups that indicate to us, the viewers, exactly where this is headed. None of that exists for them. All they get is a glance across the fish tank and maybe a little flutter in their chest. And so it goes for Ruth and Boaz. Ruth has no idea that she was just involved in a meet cute that is going to kick off one of the greatest love stories in all of Scripture. She just had a good day at work. She just found a field with lots of grain, met a kind man, and went home with dinner for her and her mother-in-law. As far as she is concerned, she just got lucky. And Boaz, he doesn't see it either. He just thinks he was simply being decent to a hardworking stranger. He has no clue that he just stepped into Act 1 of his own romance. Neither of them hears the music. Neither of them sees the hand moving the pieces around. From the inside, it's all just coincidence and kindness. And as it goes for Ruth and Boaz, so it goes for us. Most of us, we do not experience the movement of God in our lives as the movement of God. We don't get special lighting effects or voices from the clouds letting us know that something special is happening, that this right here is a holy moment. Living inside the story, what we get instead is a chance encounter, a conversation that happened to happen, the right person showing up at the right time, a kindness we didn't earn and we weren't expecting. From the inside looking out, God's hand almost never looks like God's hand. It looks to us most often like coincidence and like kindness. So let me give you an example of what I mean. This is a fairly famous example, so if you are an internet type person, I'm sure you've heard this before, but bear with me. So back in 2016, a grandmother in Arizona named Wanda Dench texted her grandkids to invite them to a Thanksgiving dinner. What Wanda did not know at the time is that her grandson had changed his number, so the person she texted was not him, and instead that text went to a complete stranger, specifically a 16-year-old high schooler who lived across town named Jamal Hinton. So Jamal looks at this text from a number that he doesn't know, inviting him to Thanksgiving, and he is fairly certain that this person is not his grandmother. So he asks for, sorry if you can't read it, but I'll explain it, that's okay. So he asks for a photo, just to be sure, and Wanda's at work, but she sends him back this selfie. And Jamal looks at it and goes, yeah, you are definitely not my grandmother. And while he could have just said, wrong number, have a nice day, and that would have been the end of it, that is not what Jamal chose to do. Instead, he chose to text back a picture of his own, and he asked if he could still come for dinner. And without missing a beat, Wanda says, of course you can. That's what grandmas do. We feed everyone. So this kid gets into his car on Thanksgiving. He drives 45 minutes across town to the house of a woman that he has never met, and he sits down to dinner with her and her whole family. And it happened to go so well that they did it again the next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. It's been 10 years now, and they have celebrated 10 Thanksgivings together. In that time, Jamal grew up, he finished school, he got engaged, he started his own business. And in that same time, Wanda's husband passed away. She moved, she got, and she beat cancer. And through all of that, all those massive changes in their lives, every single November, these two people get together and they sit down and they have Thanksgiving dinner together. But when Jamal replied to that first text sent to a wrong number, neither he nor Wanda heard heartwarming music. There were no cinematic cut shots showing their mutual reactions to this text exchange. Neither knew they were starting something special. But look at it now, 10 years later. A text sent to a wrong number resulted in a hungry boy being fed, strangers being made into family, a widow being carried through her grief, and a teenager getting a grandmother that he never expected to have. While from the inside it felt to Wanda and Jamal completely like coincidence and kindness, from the outside looking in, it feels bigger than that, doesn't it? I don't know about you, but I have a hard time chalking it up just to pure chance, to pure happenstance. Which is all to say, the God that we meet in chapter 2 of the book of Ruth does not show up in a cloud of glory, but in a chance encounter in a barley field. God doesn't send an army of angels, but nudges one person to be generous to a person in need. In other words, the God that we meet in Ruth moves quietly inside of ordinary days and ordinary lives, and is primarily experienced by those inside the story as coincidence and kindness. And so we spend our days waiting for God to part a sea for us, waiting for a voice to come booming down from the clouds, waiting for a sign that is so unmistakable we couldn't possibly miss it, then we are liable to be disappointed, because by and large, that is not how God works. And worse, while we're busy scanning the sky for some big sign, we might just miss the meet-cute that is unfolding before us. So this week, may you look at your own life, the coincidence that you would normally shrug off as luck, the kindness that you would normally just call nice, and look again. Because maybe, just maybe, it's the quiet hand of God moving the way it always does. Right there in the middle of an ordinary day. In Jesus' name.